So that was the narrative that I always grew up. I grew up here in Cambridge, and Cambridge isn't perfect, but it doesn't get to -40. There is food around. You know, it's not that tough. And I always knew that I wanted to do something to repay that. You can either take that good fortune and, you know, amass personal wealth, or try to repay it. I've tried to do some things in various different ways. I used to be an ambulance technician with St John Ambulance, so my skills are slightly lapsing now. But it brought back some memories coming in here, I have to say. Trying to look for things like that would be worthwhile. And that view, I always knew when I was growing up, I was on the left of politics. I hadn't quite realised what Montreal Protocol was, because I must have been 11 when it was signed. And I vividly remember it.
Oh, do you?
Which is slightly frightening. But I remember that being the answer. So it was my first involvement. I knew I was on the left of politics, partly because I grew up under Margaret Thatcher. And I knew I wasn't on that side. And I gradually realised that I was a liberal when I was about 17. But I was on the left, but I was on the liberal left, not the authoritarian left. And you talked about the different threads that fit together. I think they all tie together. I'll talk about all of them and one other. But I thought it might be worth saying we are the only one of the three main parties that starts our party constitution with a set of values. We have a preamble. I've written about why Labour and Conservatives don't. There's some interesting stories there. And our preamble sort of sets out a whole series of aims, the fundamental philosophical aims. It's quite long, but just the beginning of it I think is quite poetic. The Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a free, fair and open society in which no one is enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. And to me, that concept of being enslaved by these things is quite a powerful vision. That the problem with poverty isn't just the fact that you don't have money, it's that that stops you from being able to do things to be who you want to be. And the same thing about ignorance. It's why education is so important to us, because education can empower you, can free you to do all sorts of things. And the same with conformity. If you are forced to be exactly the same as everybody else, that massively limits what you can do, who you can be. And for me, that's quite an important way of thinking. That's something the party has at its heart. I've spoken for many, many years about sort of 4 key values for me, looking on from that, so 3 of which you touched on. So I've always described myself as a liberal. I'm concerned about people, empowering people. I'm very much an internationalist, so I actually got into politics in some ways through an interest in the United Nations and international human rights. So I start off from a global perspective. It's why, I'll talk about the European Union in a minute, it's why I was very proud to be one of the co-sponsors of the bill that we got through Parliament to ensure that we will keep our commitment to international aid. As a country in 1970, we promised to provide 0.7% of our income in international development aid, and then we never ever hit it. In fairness, most other countries never hit it. We're the first major economy to do so. But it's only a couple of years that we finally did that, and now, as a result of the bill which I co-sponsored, that is the law. We will help those people around the world, because there are billions of people who are far worse than we are. I'm also very committed to the environment, again I'll touch on that. And the 4th actually I always talk about is a commitment to social justice. Philosophically I come from a Rawlsian background, and we'll talk about that later if people want. I hope there will be time for questions when I finally stop speaking. Which is why I've done things to promote the living wage, to lift poorly paid people up out of income tax, because for people who are on £10,000 a year, that's a pretty tricky way to go, and I don't think you should be paying £700 in tax on it. I think you need that money. But social justice isn't just about money, it's much broader than that. Which is why we've tried to tackle housing security. We've banned revenge evictions, again something I was heavily involved in, and I've had to push some legislation to make particularly the private renting sector more stable. It's also about education, things like the pupil premium, things like the extra money I've got for Cambridgeshire schools, so that pupils from a poorer background get a fair start in life. And there's much, much more that I can talk about in all of those, but I want to get on so we have time for questions. So to pick up the 3 V's that you picked up, the first one is civil liberties. And I think this does matter, how we treat people as a state. Do we want a state that controls people? Do we want a state that empowers people? And you picked up a couple of examples. One was surveillance, the whole snooping agenda, and the other was thinking about control orders, trying to punish people before they've committed an offence. Slightly complex idea, for me at least. So the first one about surveillance, I did quite a lot of work on this. There was a piece of legislation called the Communications Data Bill, that became known as the Snoopers Charter. which were given the state were required people to keep a record of everything everybody does on the internet in case it becomes useful. Now, you describe the trade-off between that and safety. There is one, but I don't think it's as simple as a straight line. Politics is very rarely a simple straight line. And I think there are two dimensions. And I think it is possible to have more security and more privacy. And part of that is making sure that we do things which are targeted. We don't need to monitor every time one of you puts a post on Facebook. We don't need to keep track of every single email every single one of you send. Because I hope none of you are actually planning to commit terrorist acts. If you are, come and talk to me later and we can change that. And we often hear that you have to, the whole process is going through a haystack looking for a needle. Now, yes, to find a needle in a haystack, you want to find better ways of identifying it. Magnets are quite useful. Throwing much more hat, vast amounts of information on everybody who hasn't done anything, doesn't make it easier to find that needle. So I think, and I've put a huge amount of work into this, we can protect privacy as well as being safe. I don't think it's an either-or thing. And again, on any of these, if there are questions, I can go into much, much more detail. The issue about control orders, I'm fundamentally uncomfortable with the idea of sanctioning people for something they have not done. And a control order was a power for somebody who had not been convicted of any criminal offence whatsoever. In fact, some people have been found in a court of law to be not guilty. But meant that we could relocate somebody anywhere in the country, ban them from having a phone, computer, keep them in their house. I think it was originally 23 hours a day you could ban them from leaving. It was then reduced. When they haven't stopped them talking to people, stopped them going to typically mosques, it was very discriminatory in the way it was actually applied, because we think they might have done something wrong but we can't actually prove it. Is it just me who finds that awkward? If somebody has actually committed terrorist acts, is planning to heinous, awful things, we should convict them and put them in prison. We have a process for this. Punishing people who haven't done something that we can prove they did is not the way to go. And so that's why I was very pleased that we got rid of those. And the other issue is that there is feedback between civil liberties and safety. One of the things which makes people less trusting of the state, pushes people towards more radical positions. I've spoken to a range of radicals. If you want to read more about it, Majid Nawaz has a brilliant book called Radical. But one of the things is, when we bring in things which discriminate against people from their religious or ethnic background, people feel oppressed by the tools we're trying to use. Whether it's control orders, whether it's stop and search, where people are far more likely to be stopped and searched if their skin is darker than if it's lighter. When you have lots of Muslims who will say that every time they arrive in this country, they're detained to be questioned and searched. That's something that makes people less comfortable in this country, drives them away. So there's a negative feedback system. Support people who feel more comfortable with it. And this is something which we've talked about, and I occasionally hear that Lib Dems change their positions. And there was a great man, some of you may know, George Grimes Watson, who was a fellow of John's, an English John. And he died recently and left money to the National Party, the Liberal Democrats, who'd been a candidate for it in 1959. Sadly, from my perspective, we left it to the National Party rather than giving all of it to us in Cambridge who could use it. And I found a copy of his 1959 campaign literature. It's quite interesting what he said in 1959, because some of it sounds very familiar. So there's one piece, the Liberals made them get rid of identity cards, but the state still has too much control over our lives. The Home Secretary thinks the police ought to be able to listen into our private phone calls. That was 1959. And in this government, we've got rid of identity cards, and the Home Secretary thinks the police should be able to access our emails as well. Some things don't change. And that brings me on to the second subject. Because there's also a piece there, where in 1959 George wrote, "We need the European market, and Tory policy slams the door of Europe in our faces." Still exactly the same thing. We need that connection. We are a smallish island. We used to have a much bigger empire. We don't. We are much smaller. And you can do so much more when you work with other people. There are huge benefits from those interactions. Now, one of the arguments is about peace, and it's unimaginable now for France and Germany to go to war against each other. There's so many French people in Germany and vice versa, so many businesses across the borders, everybody's across everywhere. It just couldn't happen. It is unimaginable now, in a way, sadly, that was too imaginable for far too long. Our businesses benefit from the interactions. It's a much bigger market. Talk to any business in Cambridge, almost any business, and they'll say we are much better off as part of it. Now, that doesn't mean that the European Union is perfect. I agree with the critiques on it. There is a huge amount that we can and should do to improve the way Europe works. Just as there's a huge amount we could do and should do to improve the way Westminster and Whitehall work. It is quite possible to be pro-British without implying that our government runs perfectly. It doesn't. And strangely, if you say you're pro-European, it's assumed that you think everything in Europe is brilliant. Europe makes mistakes. Westminster makes mistakes. I make mistakes. We all do. So we can improve it. I think that would help with that concept of demos. I mean, you raised the subject of UKIP, and given the surroundings, I'll try and be lighter than I normally would be. I think UKIP are a phenomenal danger to this country. I think they are a very negative influence. I think there is a particular problem that they've opened up a space in the public dialogue, which even if they themselves don't say some of the things which are deeply xenophobic, deeply anti-foreigner, they create that space, they create that very negative fear, very powerful emotion, fear of the other, fear of the person who looks different, who comes from somewhere else, who speaks a different language. Very, very negative, sadly very powerful effect. And I think we've seen the rise of people talking about those sorts of things. I mean, I think Farage's comments have been disgraceful. I'll try not to be too abusive here. But it really has worried a lot of people, and it's meant that the Conservatives have moved in a similarly xenophobic direction. We see more and more rhetoric that's anti-foreigner, and we see it from the Labour Party as well. And they're selling on their own shop mugs which say "controlling immigration, vote Labour." Yeah, that's very much a dog whistle message, which I'm deeply uncomfortable with. People like Diane Abbott described it as shameful. I think we benefit from our interactions. We benefit from migration. There are challenges. There are places where migrants coming in means that there's not enough school places, not enough houses. So there are two ways you can go. You can say, we'll keep those foreigners away, or we could build some more school places and some more houses. It seems to me that is the more constructive way to go. It's certainly the one that's better economically. Lots more reasons why we should be in Europe and work together with Europe. Things don't stop at borders. Crime very rarely stops at borders these days. Small-scale crime does. Larger things, people are crossing around all the time. If we don't work with Europe, we're hitting our own best interests. And the environment, which is the last thing I'll come on to on this, is also something where we have to look internationally. There is little point solving Britain's carbon emissions only if we can't get other people to do it as well. We should do it, but you can't just do it here. We need to work with Europe. If you think about things like acid rain, it affects neighbouring countries, not just our own country. We have very bad air quality, it's often blown in. We have to work together. Certainly with the environment subject, and I do agree with the greenest of the main parties, is that we kept pushing. We've had a bit of a challenge in this government, partly because the Tories are less keen on it, and therefore, really interestingly, they haven't wanted to announce the huge successes that we've had. We've tripled the investment in this country in renewables, but the Conservative part of the government, some of them are very good on this, by the way, but not all of them, haven't wanted to talk about it. And of course, Labour don't want to talk about success that the government's had, of course, and nobody listens to us when we talk about it. We need more volume, we don't get enough coverage. So there's a lot of really good things that nobody knows about. Huge increase in renewables, I say, 1 million houses insulated. Some really important things, we talk about richer and poorer people. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that we've started to tackle private rented accommodation. So one of the challenges has been, if you own your home, you know why it's worth insulating it. You know you save money by insulating it. If you're renting, you know you'll save money if it's insulated, but it's the landlord who will insulate it. And there's always been this mismatch. And so many of the worst properties in the country are in the private rented sector. And we pushed through a law which means that from 2018, it will be illegal to rent out those worst properties. And then to gradually step up that standard higher and higher. Because that's the solution to the challenge you posed about higher energy prices. The problem isn't how much you pay per unit of energy, it's how much you pay to heat your house. So if we can make all the houses more efficient, the price of energy can go up, but the price you pay comes down. And that's where we need to get to. That's better for you, it's better for the planet as well. You talked about subsidies and technology, and I think this is a really interesting question. The aim has to be to reduce the subsidies for all of these. The low carbon technologies. We have to see what's happened with hydroelectric up in Scotland. There isn't a subsidy for hydroelectric in Scotland because it doesn't need it. It makes enough money anyway, and that's where we have to get to for wind, that's where we have to get to for solar, and I think we can do it. And by pushing ahead here, use subsidies to get going, because early products are always more expensive. You know, the first computers, the first cars, everything, always start too expensive and then the price comes down. So by pushing ahead here, we are helping to develop this technology which can be rolled out elsewhere when they are cheaper, when they don't need that subsidy. I do agree that business is fantastic, and we've seen some brilliant things. This is pretty much where I'll finish. Cambridge has done a huge amount to lead the world, and there are clean technologies here which will transform what can happen everywhere else. I could give you so many examples. 819 who are actually doing a lot of stuff in other parts of the world where you can get solar working on that basis. One of my pet favourites is a company called Cambridge Polysolar. Has anybody heard of it? So they make glass, which is also a solar panel. Some of it's a bit orangey, the newer ones are clear. And so any building which has glass in it, glass walkways, glass sides, it could just be solar panelled. The Future Business Centre on King's Edges Road has a whole chunk of these. Without anybody noticing, and for almost the same cost as building glass, you get solar panel as well. That's brilliant. Imagine if the entire shard, whether you like it or not, was also a massive set of solar panels and nobody had to know about it. That's the sort of exciting technology we can do here. So I've spoken, I think, for far too long. I hope some of it's at least been interesting. But I am very proud of our legacy, the morals that lead up to it. You spoke about John Stuart Mill, fantastic man. You spoke about the work from Lloyd George at Beveridge. And actually that's where I'd like to stop, because I am very proud of that legacy. That we introduced the pension, really important change in this country. And the Beveridge report creating the NHS, something I am incredibly proud of. We as Liberals will continue to press for it and to expand it into the areas it doesn't do well enough. There was a big failure when the NHS was set up, in that it was always assumed that healthcare would become cheaper every single year because people would be healthier. Brilliantly, but sadly for that idea, we're now able to keep people alive for longer. We can do things we could never do before, but it costs money. So we have to try to get that extra support there and fix one of the other problems with the NHS, which is that it's never dealt with mental health anything like as much as it has to do. So that is a huge priority for me, because I think mental health is really important. And as a moral issue, it matters. We can't allow that stigma to continue. Sorry for descending onto a few specific details there. I hope you found that interesting. Very, very keen to hear any questions, comments.